You get on a ride for the first time. You take a lap around it, the feeling of joy is overwhelming. As the train pulls back into the station, you're quick to proclaim that this is your favorite new ride. But over time, the joy starts to fade. The track becomes bumpy, the train jerks around and lunges side to side. It becomes almost unbearable. The joyous sensation of the train running around the track is now a horrid experience, and you sit there wondering, how could the park let the ride fall into this disarray? How could this happen? Well, the truth is, it didn't.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, today's show, we're going to talk about rides getting older, getting more violent. It's like, what's going on with these things? How come your favorite ride is starting to suck? What can the park do to fix it? Is there anything they can do? And it's going to have a surprising twist that a lot of people weren't seeing coming. So stay tuned. I hope you like it. If you're coming back for another video, make sure you like and subscribe because you've already returned once. You're probably going to do it again. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Let's get right into this video. Okay, so one of the big questions or one of the big things that enthusiasts, people always talk about is the ride has gotten rough. The ride's gotten rough. It's like, okay, well, let's examine that because I get a lot of questions from people saying like, well, how did the ride get rough? How did this happen? How did we go down this path? And it's kind of surprising. So let's talk about some of the reasons why rides get rough. So these are typically referred to as aging rides. Aging rides typically get rougher as the ride gets older. So there's two categories here. We're going to look at steel coasters and wooden coasters in these categories. I don't plan on this video taking a long time. Hopefully it doesn't. But the two categories are divided up that way because steel is pretty maintainable. Wood it's its own creature. So we'll get into some of that as we go along. Okay, for steel roller coasters, what are some of the reasons why a steel roller coaster begins to age? That aged feeling where I say, well, it used to be like this and now it feels like this. Why is that? Well, the first thing out there is honestly, it's in the seat of the roller coaster. It's in the padding right back here, right? These guys, high density polyurethane foam. The foam over time does rupture its cells inside and actually becomes compressed to some extent. So the more compressed the foam becomes, well, the better it feels on your body. Compressed foam feels really good because it's nice and soft, it's pliable. It does not, however, absorb all the rough spots, impacts, and things like that out on the track. So soft foam isn't great for making a smooth ride. Actually, the harder it is, the smoother the ride is. So newer seats make for smoother rides, but as the age of the coaster starts to increase, a lot of times seats, seat pans, seat backs, that sort of stuff are not replaced on a regular basis. And depending on the wear and tear of the environment and stuff like that, they can actually start to soften up. And there's not really much saying that it needs to be replaced other than if it rips, if it tears, if the UV beats it to pieces, if it's got holes missing out of the padding and things like that. That's the type of stuff, that's when parks replace that. A lot of parks don't preemptively replace their padding until it starts looking really worn down and ratty. So one of the things that can contribute to coasters wearing in is the foam padding simply that's on the seat around the coach, even on the lap bars that's around you. Another thing is worn suspension bushings. Now, roller coasters actually have, for the most part, suspension underneath them. I have a lot of experience on older Vekomas. Older Vekomas out underneath the out over the rear, the axles on side to side where the wheel carriers mount in. Unlike a B&M, like something like this, the axles go in through the side, and Vekoma uses these big rubber pucks that sit underneath there and can sit on the bottom and top, and they sandwich the assembly together, called elastosprings. Elastosprings are there to absorb the vibration from the coach jerking up and down and bumping left and right as it goes around the track. Now, the elastosprings wear out. Vekoma gives a dimension that says, hey, once the spring is crushed this much, Like literally when you pull the puck out, it looks like a hockey puck brand new. And when they come out, they look kind of like rounded on the sides because they've compressed. The material has gone outwards. So Vekoma says, hey, after a certain amount of time, you have to replace those elasto springs. Honestly, we pretty much replaced all of ours every year, but there's more things inside the suspension. On B&M roller coasters, a lot of the older ones especially, right around where the road wheel axles would pin in back here, there was a bushing on the inside. That bushing actually had rubber around it, so it was a suspension bushing that the road wheels are held captive inside of. Those bushings over time would also wear down, not physically wear down like the dimension would change, but the density of the rubber would change essentially. The bushings would start to get older and fatigued. Honestly, I worked at the park for 14 years and we had never once replaced any of those rubber bushings inside any of the wheel carriers. Never once replaced those things. We had spares, never used them because there was no reject criteria for that. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people that work at parks say, we replace those things every year. We did not. We let those things just run indefinitely because we couldn't determine that they were okay or they were not okay. So as long as the wheel was performing the way it was supposed to, we left that stuff alone. Inside rides, some of rides have more suspension bushings inside there. There might be something over the pivots overhead or something along those lines. Definitely on roller coasters on the sides here, like the B&Ms, they use these pads right here. These pads go in the wheel carrier right here, and they actually help absorb shock from the guide wheels. Well, these pads don't have a reject criteria by most manufacturers. If they get worn down, you could put shims behind them. For the longest time, B&M didn't even say to use anything like that. They just said, we said, what happens if the pad wears down and this dimension opens up? Right here, if this dimension opens up and lets more side-to-side play, B&M really didn't care about that. So was like, okay, we actually put shims in ours to make that gap tighter and tighter. But that was just what we did at our particular park. But those things can wear, and they can produce vibration and things like that out there that there's no real standard like spec to replace that stuff by. It's all kind of park history and what the park feels. If the park never ever wants to replace these things, they never will. It's not a big deal. The manufacturer doesn't say that they have to be replaced all the time, so it's not a big deal to a lot of people. One of the big causes of vibration, bumps, wear and tear is actually bores. So what I'm talking about for bores is I'm talking about this opening right here. This is a bore. A pin will go through that. So you have a round pin that goes inside of a round bore. Now on a lot of older rides, newer rides too, they use a brass bushing. They use an insert inside that bore. Okay, so we'll do this. This is the first time I've taken this apart on video. And guide wheel spring right there. Okay, so on all these pivots and everything like this, you have two components inside of here. The first one is a reducing bushing. This guy sits inside here. That's what the bolt goes inside of. It's simply to take up space, but this bushing here sits inside of these bushings right here. You see them, they're kind of goldish color right there. Those bushings are what's actually taking the tolerance. So when you put the two of those together, there is a bit of slop between them. Now this is where grease comes in because you want this slop as little as nothing as possible inside there. But you want grease inside of there to keep those dimensions the same. Well, what will happen is that the pin, or in this case the sleeve that was in there, the pin and the sleeve will actually start to egg shape. They won't be perfectly round anymore. They will be tighter on one side than the other. By the same token, the bushing, these gold guys right here, these are actually meant to be replaced. And these bushings will also egg shape. They also wear opposite of each other. So the top of the egg on one side will meet the bottom of the egg on the other side and produce the maximum amount of wear and tear inside there that will allow this wheel out on the track just to sit there and vibrate and rattle and do all sorts of stuff. Well, that's the same thing when it comes to larger pins, like suspension pins that holds the entire wheel carrier up. They will do the exact same thing. On the SLC, there is a backbone pin. If you're sitting in there, if like my shoulder was the center of the backbone, you're sitting up, there's a big pin that sits right up here inside the frame. It's about that big in diameter. That pin goes through the backbone bushing and is locked into place. Vekoma didn't make that assembly to where you tightened it down to get the play out of there. It was simply just the pin to those 4 bushings. 2 in the backbone and then 2 in the main axle housing. So when those started to egg shape out, you're now talking about just the slightest tiniest little bit of wear way up here, but then your seat is down 4 feet below that, and it's flopping all over the place, just amplifying any wear and tear that's on that bushing. So the bushings and bearings on steel roller coasters have a lot to do with how the thing rides. But these are actually really minute. They are so small, it's not much. Unless you have something big wear out a lot, you're really not going to feel these minute little changes in the roller coaster. One of the other things you get is dirt clumped on the track. When the wheels pass over, they will actually create little bumps on the wheels, and it will cause vibration inside of there. And then egg-shaped wheels. As the wheel spins, it might be one of those things like it might go up and down as it's spinning around. If you look at it really carefully, it might go up and down as it travels around, especially on the road wheels. Nylon wheels are the worst. Egg-shaped nylon wheels or flat-spotted nylon wheels. They turn into any shape but round, which causes all sorts of vibrations. If you're ever on a roller coaster that makes a loud roar when it runs, which typically nylon wheels will make the roar sound, and you say, it feels like my teeth were going to rattle out of my head, it's like, haha, you were sitting above an out-of-round nylon wheel. Almost guarantee you it. That's what happened, because when those things get up to speed, boy, they shake everything in the entire chassis, and it is not a good feeling at all. Okay, so that is steel coasters. Realistically, there's not that much stuff in there. There's some pins, there's some bushings, there's some pads. There's really not much in there that wears down. As far as a track and structure is concerned, it doesn't move. If it was manufactured kind of bumpy, where you might have some inconsistency in the track, it's typically too much for the park to change unless it's a big capital expenditure. The park's not going to go out there and smooth the track out unless they really wanted to pump a lot of money into it, and honestly, most of the time that doesn't happen. The track smoothing out stuff I've been a part of one time in my entire career. One time, when we did that, you could see the difference on the accelerometer readings, but you could not feel the difference on the train. The accelerometer said it was smoother. In the train, I couldn't feel the difference before and after, and that was like $180,000 fix just to do like a couple of small little sections of track. Not much bang for the buck on those things, so typically track straightening is not worth it for a lot of parks. All right, let's move into wooden roller coasters. Now, wooden roller coasters, unlike the steel roller coasters, they have kind of the same components that'll wear down. You have some suspension inside the train. There's lots of bushings and bearings and lots of grommets and things like that inside the train that can wear down and cause things to be rougher over the season. Most of the time, wooden roller coasters are so hard on those components that we just replace everything at the end of the year because it is thoroughly used. It's not like, hey, let's measure and check and see if this rubber bushing is okay. It's like, nope, as soon as you pull it out of the coach, you pretty much just throw it straight in the trash can because I almost guarantee you that thing is completely bad. Sometimes we'll even do that midway throughout the season as well and kind of freshen up the train to go in there, but that's a lot of work to do. Most parks won't preemptively do that. Now, on wooden roller coasters, you have steel wheels, typically. If we're talking, I know a lot of people will bring up RMCs. I still consider an RMC like a steel roller coaster. A steel track, it's urethane wheels. I know it's sitting on a wooden structure, but it's steel, and so not really. I'm talking classic wooden roller coasters. They use steel wheels. They use steel surfaces on the track. So your road and guide is steel and steel. So there is a lot of things that can happen there. Once the steel starts to wear down, if it gets hiccups in it or little like bumps inside of it, like a nylon, it'll start to do that chatter mark and it will go out. So sometimes areas are rough. They need to be, the track steel, the laminate needs to be replaced. The top steel, I should say, needs to be replaced on the track. So sometimes the top steel needs to be replaced. That's where the majority of wear and tear happens. Sometimes if it's a high bank G-force area, sometimes your guide steel will need to be replaced. That can cause some minor inconveniences there. The track to tracks where they overlay, they're not like wooden roller coasters where they, like they butt perfectly up to each other and there's no seam whatsoever. Nope, track to track, there's typically about a 1/4 inch spacing between the two, and they're cut at a diagonal, not straight in the direction of travel. They're cut at about a 45. That to allow the transition. So you'll feel those as it goes down there. But the majority of wooden track stuff is all in the track itself and the structure. It's in the wood. Because wood, even though it's been cut down and refined, wood is a living, breathing thing. It will swell up with water. It will dry out with a lack of water. It will shrink back down. If it gets brittle, it'll start breaking bolts. There's all sorts of things, like the hydration of the track is critical on wooden roller coasters. When they get too wet, they swell up and it pulls all the hardware into the wood a little bit. By that I mean like you have the head of a bolt inside the wood like this, and then when it swells up really heavy, that gets really tight and it starts to pull that fastener into the wood. And then when it gets loose again, when the water goes away, now that bolt assembly is loose. Well, the biggest thing on a wooden roller coaster is the laminate stack. Underneath the road wheels on both sides, the laminate stack is a series of boards stacked vertical that span the bends. If you want to see a video about the wooden roller coaster construction, I have a video on wooden roller coaster construction where I made a small section out in the garage for the video. It was really hot that day, I remember. But anyways, I go over all the surfaces of the bents, batters, stringer boards, runners, all the stuff. I go over all that in that video. But basically, the laminate stack is what the train rides on top of. That's what the steel is mounted to. That laminate stack is essentially bridging the bends. Those are the horizontal pieces that you go by. So when the laminate stack loosens up, it goes from a big, solid, essentially chunk of wood going over all of that, and it goes to smaller individual pieces of wood. When they loosen, that allows this really bumpy, rough ride as it goes around there. So a lot of wooden roller coaster rough and tough feel is attributed to the condition of the wood.
Wood.
As wood gets older, it gets fatigued, it gets worn in, so it does need to be replaced more often. When people say, why did this ride change so much? When you're talking about a true wooden roller coaster, that question is absolutely valid. There are things behind that question. It's like, yeah, what are we looking at? Are we looking at, are they watering it enough? Some places put oil on the wood. Is the steel in good condition? Is there areas that are just known problematic? Plenty of wooden roller coasters have problematic areas where it's kind of under-designed, but the only way to fix it is typically to increase the laminate stack, which has its own set of problems that are very hard to deal with. You can't just go around increasing the size of a laminate stack, no matter how much you want it to happen. Wooden coasters, again, are a special creature. Then we move into, let's go out of roller coasters real quick, and let's go into flat rides. I won't spend a lot of time on this subject, I know. Flat rides, they work off of a series of very large bushings, very large bearings, which we've already identified. These are problematic things. When bearings wear down, they become loose. And when bushings wear down, they also become loose. They get egg-shaped and they start flopping around inside of each other. But flat rides also have gear lash that you have to deal with. A lot of these things move left to right, front to back. They rotate multiple directions. And a lot of the times you have gear lash that has to be pulled back into norm. Now, gears, what happens is when they mesh together, if there's too much between the gears where they flop around like this, you typically push them into each other closer and there's a lot less movement. Well, that movement, that side to side when you play with it, that's called gear lash. You can actually measure the lash if you stick a feeler gauge between those two sets of gears. Now, typically tighter together, the less lash there is, but at some point the gears will mechanically start to bind and they'll tear each other apart. So you can't do too much in there. But when the gears wear down, the lash becomes more predominant and they're just flopping all over the place inside of a flat ride. So you could push the gearbox and the ring gear and the ring and pinion gear, or whatever it might be, together and tighten that up to a certain point. But then once it gets to that certain point, you're pretty much stuck at like, well, you could push it in a little bit more, but it's not going to help because everything's worn down too much. So you have to replace the ring, the pinion, the spur gear, the worm gear, whatever it might be. You have to replace that stuff. On flat rides, those things are typically really expensive. Honestly, they rival large chunks of cost of the ride itself. On flat rides are the things that parks want to spend the least amount of money on. They should just be able to turn that ride on each year and have it go. And then when you're like, hey, we've got this flat ride that people like, they don't really love it, they just like it, it's okay. And we need to spend $500,000 on it this year to replace some gears. It's like, what? The ride might only cost $1 million brand new. So they're like, we don't want to spend $500,000 in this thing. What's it doing? Well, it just kind of rides rough. And they're like, fine, let it ride rough. If it's not a safety issue, let it ride rough. And then you could pull the chain a little bit and say, well, it is a safety issue. And they go, fine, don't open the ride. And then the ball gets kicked into somebody else's court if they want to tear the thing out or not. But flat rides, that wear and tear that I'm talking about on those big bearings and stuff, the rides are designed to last a very long time. So that wear takes a very long time to get there. I'm talking about over 15, 20 years of service is how long it takes for those flat rides to tear up those big components like that. So everything I've been talking about can be measured. Basically, it's not something that you really feel. I mean, the wooden roller coasters are the exception to the rule. But on the steel roller coasters, all these little bushings and bearings and everything else, and the flat rides, those bushings and gear lash and all that other stuff, they aren't really things that you feel. They're things that could be measured with an accelerometer, where you can actually see the little spikes in there and say, okay, there's more spikes, there's less spikes, there's bigger spikes, there's smaller spikes. So you can say, like, we were able to measure what it's changed to. But typically, your average person can't feel any of that wear and tear. So why is the ride falling apart? Well, the ride's actually falling apart because you're addicted to drugs. When we ride roller coasters, in our brain, this is going to be a biochemical response here. In our brain, when you first start riding roller coasters, you get adrenaline pumping through your veins. What's adrenaline? Adrenaline it's a chemical that's produced inside your brain, and adrenaline is triggered when your fight or flight response gets triggered. When you hear a loud boom close to you and you get that startled, like that, your brain goes into fight or flight. That means you're either going to turn around and face whatever is happening around you, or you are going to run away. Fight or flight. So to do that, your brain pumps out a chemical called adrenaline. It causes your heart rate to go through the roof. It causes your blood pressure to drop down, to take blood away from arms and legs and things like that that might not be needed. You're talking life or death scenarios. And it pushes a lot of blood up into your brain, and it gives you this sensation that everything has slowed down. If you've ever been in one of these situations where you've had almost a near-death experience where something almost happened, and people will say it's like everything slowed down. Your body got flooded with adrenaline, and your brain was able to basically interpret time a little bit slower. Okay, so that is the adrenaline that gets generated out there when you're riding around on this roller coaster. When you come back, there's another chemical that your brain has produced now after your ride. When you come back, you're super happy when you come back into the station. Big smile on your face. A lot of people are clapping and that sort of stuff. That is called dopamine. Dopamine basically is the chemical that's created for the pleasure center of your brain, the stuff that feels good. And like, it's every type of pleasure. The dopamine is released when there's things like, you just go shopping. When you buy something, dopamine's released. When you eat something you like, dopamine's released. Dopamine's released for almost everything. That's the reward center of your brain. That's what says like, hey, this was great. So the darker side of dopamine is that it can create addictions. Like when people have done drugs, like they have a legitimate, I'm not talking rides, I'm talking a legitimate drug addiction. Dopamine is responsible for that. They are after that next big dopamine rush to get from those drugs. So it's something that's, it's a very bad thing. Nobody wants that, but that is the chemical that's going on inside of your head. So on roller coasters, the two mix together basically during the ride, and you get a, what's the best way to put it? You get a cocktail of exhilaration. During the ride, those two mix together, and as you're out there, basically, this is your brain's reinforcement for like as adrenaline's happening, so it's slowing things down, and then dopamine's being released, and it's increasing that, hey, let's do this again for a longer period of time. The two mixed together basically is what gives you that let's do it again feeling, right? But for this, I want to focus a little bit more on adrenaline. So adrenaline is the thing that hides all the bumps and bangs out there on the track. As your body's being pumped with adrenaline when you're out there on the track, it is now focused on surviving. It is not focused on the bump, the bang, the little bit of a shake, the rough spot. It's not focused on all that stuff. Your body's in fight or flight mode. Your body is just trying to get through to the end. It's not worried about when you're running from something horrible happening behind you, you don't care that something minor is an inconvenience. Like if you're running to save your life, you don't care that your arm is itching. Your brain has wiped out the fact that your arm itches. It's gone. Like you don't care about that. So you're going along and these things on the ride, and your body's just getting flooded with adrenaline. Over time of these adrenaline spikes, your body's kind of abused that reward system. So now what was a big adrenaline spike is not a big adrenaline spike anymore. Does that make sense? So if you think about it, the first time you rode that ride, whatever ride it is, I don't care, right? The first time you rode that thing, you were screaming your head off all the way around the track. Yelling, having fun, all that stuff. Got back in, it was amazing. You've ridden that ride so many times now. What happens now? Can you ride the ride straight-faced? I can. Do you have to yell? Nope. Do you have to do anything? It's like, nope. I could ride the ride while I'm just playing on my phone. It's like, yep, trying to get that next level of Candy Crush on there. It doesn't produce the same adrenaline anymore. Therefore, the adrenaline doesn't have that big mix with the reward at the end for dopamine. The two don't really mix together anymore. They do, but it's a very small little thing. So when you don't have all that adrenaline and all that dopamine and all that other stuff, that chemical concoction in your head, what's that leave you free to do? It leaves you free to notice those bumps and bangs. It leaves you free to be like, why is this seat uncomfortable? It leaves you free to say, like, why does that chair across from me look like it needs to be painted? Why does that make that sound? Why does that look horrible? Why is this so bumpy? It's because all of your adrenaline, all of your everything else has gone away. And you have to, then that's what a lot of thrill seekers do. They go out and they chase that next big rush of adrenaline. They chase that next big dopamine release, that next big, that was amazing, that chemical concoction of adrenaline and dopamine mixed together. That's what a lot of amusement rides are fueled by, So everyone goes out and they chase that next big thing. Well, when you keep hitting the same thing over and over again, it loses its effect. And then you start to notice all the other things. But guess what? Everyone else around you, all the general public, 99% of people that are on that ride, will never ever notice the same thing that you're noticing on your favorite ride. So a lot of us have literally turned riding rides into a chemical addiction, essentially, from going from one thing to another. I mean, I am no different than that. When I first went to my former work and started riding roller coasters, it was a ton of fun. Hands up, yelling, the whole business. When I left, I was just sitting there like, yep, this is that ride. Yep, riding around the ride. I was like, yeah. I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, I got other things to do when I get back off of this. I've got to go work a rehab list. I've got to go figure out why this ride over here is not homing properly. I got other things to do. And this is while I'm on a roller coaster that people will be screaming crazy about. I've said this one before. We wanted fuel to repaint the trains on a ride because we did not like the way they looked. We were riding on there and they just did not look good to us. So we're like, we were trying to get our management to release more money. So we said, the way we're going to do this is we're going to ask the general public what they thought of how the trains looked. Well, when we asked the general public how the trains looked, we got people that just got off the ride, right? We said, how did the trains look? They're like, what trains? The trains you just rode on. Oh, they're fine. And then they went on. So we weren't getting the answers that we wanted. We wanted them to say, like, they looked horrible. What do you mean? But we dug into it a little bit deeper. And it's like we dug down to, like, hey, what color was the train you were riding on? I don't remember. It's like, what seat were you riding in? Don't remember. A lot of people could remember the row-ish, whether they were towards the front or towards the back. That was about all the general public could remember. That was it. They couldn't remember the exact seat they're in, the exact row they were in, the color of the train that they were on. They couldn't remember the color of the station that it was in. Nothing. We could not fuel our new paint that way. That was very interesting. But people wound up in that adrenaline. Their brain just forgets the small stuff. Forget it. We don't care. We're just going to go with the fight or flight, with the dopamine release afterwards, and that's what everyone chases. That's what all the manufacturers chase too. They know you're going to hit that reward center pretty hard. People are going to come back for that time and time and time again. If you don't make that reward center release really big, they're not going to come back a lot. It's got to be a big chemical payoff for people to come back to the ride consistently. So I know it's kind of an interesting thing. Not the way people thought the video was going to go. Yeah, why is your ride getting rough? Because your drug fix is wearing off, essentially. Oh, man. On the more serious side to that, though, I mean, drugs, like we're going to say not brain release drugs. We're going to say other drugs are a real bad issue. Don't get involved with them.
And as for drugs, well, drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. Okay.
If you're involved with them or know somebody that's involved with them and they need to get help, there's plenty of numbers out there. Call up one of those numbers, go online. There's plenty of places that are willing to help with drug addictions. They will ruin your life. That is not a fun thing at all. So the old-fashioned phrase of just say no to drugs, it's a true thing. All right, I think that's going to do it for this video. Like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. With this information, what do you think? Do you think there's been stuff it's like, oh yeah, well, when you explain it with all the adrenaline being released and then the no longer having adrenaline released the longer you go on the ride, does that make some of the wear and tear on your ride a little more like, oh yeah, that's probably what happened? Again, wooden coasters, not so much. They do wear and tear a lot. But for steel roller coasters, you probably just didn't notice that stuff the first bunch of times you're riding. And then as you got more experience with the ride, that adrenaline went away, and then you noticed all those things. It happens a lot. It happens with people. They just don't understand that that's what happened. They think the ride got worse, and that actually wasn't the case. All right. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Stay off the air gates. Bye.